The Birth Circle podcast features experts in all the nuanced areas of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum with the aim of helping women make the choices that will keep them safe, healthy, and empowered. We respect all birth choices and believe in supporting informed consent and evidence-based practices. Nothing said on this podcast should be taken as medical advice. You should always seek the advice of a competent professional for your care. Welcome to the Birth Circle podcast.
This is Sarah with Birth Circle, and today I'm so excited to explore a really interesting topic with Kristin Mallon. And Kristin is a board-certified nurse midwife, medical strategist expert, a published author, and a mother of four. She grew up in Newport Beach, California, and fell in love with and then married an adventurous, fun-loving New Yorker. She's now settled in New Jersey, and her expertise lies in leading medical business development, strategic planning, organizational planning, and medical practice transformation. As a midwife, she began her strategy and business development work with several out-of-network OBGYN practices, but she's since grown into the field of plastics and aesthetics. Kristin's been called a visionary when it comes to medicine as a business, and her strengths lie in the growth and the development of best medical practices, teams, and bottom lines. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
I'm really excited to explore this topic with you. It's not something that I've ever covered before on the podcast. And for the listeners that are mamas and doulas, I think you'll find this conversation really interesting because I feel like a better understanding of how the birth industry works and how our providers are, behind the scenes, the insurance, all the money and how the industry works, better understanding gives us more options and better choices. We can make better choices for ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because when we think about birth for so many of us is really a calling and a vocation and a passion. And we don't always go into the birth field with the intention to make money. But then when we get into it, we realize that we still want to eat and pay our mortgages or rent. So it's a part of it that sometimes we kind of want to like shut the door on and pretend it doesn't exist. But then it just kind of piles up and gets the best of us. And there's a way where all types of birth workers, doulas, midwives, baby massagers, lactation consultants can really benefit from just kind of like looking at this aspect of it that is a business and kind of like applying little bits and pieces of it. And it's okay to kind of think about like, I really love what I do and I really love my job and I really have this passion, but I still want to make money at the same time. Like both are okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So how did you get your start in this birth industry world crazy thing?
Oh, a long time ago, I wanted to be an archaeologist and I went to UC Berkeley in California and I took my first archaeology class and realized how boring it was actually. And I was just like totally overwhelmed and lost because I was so convinced for so long. I think I maybe watched one too many Indiana Jones movies and that I wanted to be an archaeologist. And so I kind of quickly had to change majors and I got into psychology. And I was like, well, I don't want to work with adults because adults, there's all these things that have happened to them that have kind of like the layers and layers and layers you have to dig so deep. So I'm like, let me work with adolescents. And I'm like, oh, they've had so many layers, even as adolescents. I'm like, let me work with kids. And then when I really just kind of got down to it, I really felt like it's really about birth. It's really about setting the family up well with the birth to kind of to thwart off so many things. And I think that aspect of who I am kind of carried over into what I do now, which is, I do a lot of strategy and a lot of development for medicine as a business. And it's because I'm very proactive. I'm not retroactive. So I like to see what's coming and try to anticipate twists and turns before they actually happen.
I love it. I've said, you fix birth and you fix world hunger, you fix all the problems because they all really stem at birth, all the traumas
right,
that
absolutely.
we endure can, get mama and baby connected and the family whole at the beginning, and you can prevent a lot of hard stuff.
Yeah, and I've been doing birth work for 17 years, and I've just really seen now I can look back the first babies I've delivered are now adults, and to still have some of those relationships with some of those clients, and to see like where they are and who they were, and how when the baby is born, the mother is born also, like how that really is so powerful and such a big, it's cool to watch it come to fruition when your career spans for so long.
When the baby is born, so is the mother. I love that. I love that so much. Okay, so what do you mean by birth as a business? You've already said that a couple times, but what does that mean? Like
Well,
exactly.
so I mean, if you think back to what are the oldest professions, people think of
Well,
midwives. I mean, they think of other things too, but
yes.
midwifery and midwives was probably came first. If you think about chicken or egg, I think people had to be born first. And so there was always some way that usually there was some way that these women were cared for and were compensated for their work. Women, midwives were traditionally women when we're talking about thousands and thousands of years ago.
Right.
And it just makes sense that if you're going to devote your life to becoming an expert in a field, just like if you're going to devote your life to being an astronaut or to being a scientist or to building a sports car, that you get paid for that. And maybe you're putting the cart before the horse. Like maybe you're not thinking about the payment first, you're thinking about the work first and the passion first. But that's kind of what I mean is like medicine as a business, and even birth as a business. And there was that movie that Ricky Lake did, The Business of Being Born. And I think that it kind of got a negative spin about, because I think the business of being born could be a positive thing, especially when it comes to birth workers.
I love that spin. And you bring up an excellent point. So when did it stop being a business? When did it stop being an occupation and start being what it is now? Because part of the problem is the money is so disconnected from the actual business. Like very few people are paying their OBs directly or their midwives directly because insurance is involved. So like, talk to me about when did that all started, and what has it done to the practice, to the profession itself?
Yeah. So just in the 2 decades that I've been doing it, I've worked in both for fee for services. So I've worked in cash paying where we didn't take any insurance. I've worked where we worked with women who had out of network benefits, meaning that a lot of people and women kind of understand the concept of my insurance is I'm in network with this doctor, or I'm out of network with that doctor or provider. If I'm out of network, I have to maybe pay a little bit more, which isn't always necessarily true. And then I've also worked in an in-network practice where we accepted all insurances. And so just in the last 2 decades, I've just seen a dramatic drop in the reimbursement of what physicians and OBs are paid in terms of their compensation for birth. And more than like a 200% drop.
Wow.
And I think that's what we're seeing now is we're seeing more of these factory practices where women go in and they're one as a number, because the only way that physicians can maintain their lifestyle and providers can maintain their lifestyle and can maintain, not even necessarily with their peers, radiologists and anesthesiologists and oncologists, but just with their peers like pediatricians and dermatologists, other types of doctors who do in-office work. They have to have 2x, 3x, 4x the volume that they had even just 5-10 years ago.
Wow. So they're turning their practices into factories just so they can pay. I mean, the malpractice alone and malpractice insurance alone for some of these doctors is more than some people make in a year. So, so they've got all these costs, but they're being paid less and less by the insurance companies. So they've got to just line them up.
Yeah. And so it's, I think sometimes physicians and midwives too, because you see this in midwifery practices also, where it'll be a group of 15 midwives, and how can you really meet 15 people in a pregnancy? You only have 12 visits.
Nope.
So, and the same with physician practices that are that large, or they have these separate groups where they'll have the group of physicians, 7 or 8 physicians that see you in the office. And then they have a group of 7 or 8 physicians that do all the deliveries. And it's a very disjointed practice, but and sometimes physicians and midwives are blamed for that, but it's really that my perception is that insurance has really, especially in network reimbursement rates, has really pigeonholed physicians and midwives into these types of practices and is leaving women with no choices, minimal choices.
Well, I want to talk about the reimbursement amount, but I also want to ask a little side question here. Well, more like a comment. I've noticed a lot of people will, you said people don't like that. They think that's really disjointed and they want a practitioner that sees them through the whole process. And I'll see a lot of midwives start their careers and say, I'm going to see the woman through her entire pregnancy, all the prenatals, and then I'm going to be at her birth. But then the reality sets in of the on-call life and the lifestyle of being the only provider in your practice. And then sometimes she pairs with another midwife. And then the taste of that freedom that she can get by not having to be on call every minute of every second of every day of every, then they bring on more and more midwives. And then soon they're in a group practice again. And it's just, the clients keep asking for a single provider, but it's just not feasible. Like the on-call life is really hard. Plus then you don't get paid very much.
Right. So it's possible that the single provider, should be available, but then there should be an understanding, I think, of the reimbursement for that type of practice. So
Yeah.
I think that that's really kind of what it is. And a total side note, but like in other practices that I've worked with where they have the similar idea that what you're talking about, where they have 3 midwives and then they add on 2 more and now they have 5 and then they get to 8. There are other things that groups can do. They can do pods, or they can do co-sharing or colors. They can have like red team, green team, blue team, where, you're in a group where you see a group of 4 and that this group of 4 is your group of 4, even though maybe you have an emergency, the baby's not moving, you're 28 weeks, you have to go to the office and you end up seeing the blue team because that's who's there that day. But your core 4 midwives.
That's a good idea.
More, right. So there are these ideas that, when you start to kind of look at medicine as a business and you can start to pull from other silos, like what are they doing in dermatology? What do they do in restaurants? What do they do in hotel management? What do they do in all these other fields? It can really be applied and make a better experience for clients and for the providers also.
You also said medicine as a business, and you kind of made a motion with your hand that made me think, why do we not accept birth as a business? We accept dermatology. We expect plastic surgery to be treated like a business. I mean, they even have billboards, right? And referral bonuses. And
yeah, absolutely. And things, dentistry
and dentistry for sure.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to like heart surgery or birth, we expect our providers to just be there.
Be altruistic.
Yes. Yes.
Or wholly altruistic. I mean, I think altruism is part of it, but maybe not the whole thing. And so but I think that I think that there is a time and a place for the single provider group. But then women have to think about too, like, do you want to put all your eggs in this one basket? Like that movie Knocked Up, I promise I'm going to be there at your birth. And then that's the day that her son's graduating from college and she's not there. Or that's the day that the midwife is, it's her, somebody's sick in her family,
or she gets sick herself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or the other thing that I always tell women, because I did solo practice, I did solo practice for a long time, is that, when I finally took on a partner, is that like, if I've been up for 3 days in a row, you don't want me at your birth.
I've seen midwives be at births where they've just come off another birth. And I'm like, wow, you should not be here. You need to be at home.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then it's kind of like, I've always learned, and this is something that took me a while to learn in my own practice, is that when women are kind of presented with the facts up front, they are much more accepting of like what the reality is. So if they really want me to be at their birth, but then I say, okay, I'm in a group with these 2 other women or these 2 other people, and I'm going to do everything that I can, but you need to make sure that you meet these 2 other people and you're comfortable with them. And and especially at the first visit, if that conversation is kind of happening, then I found that setting all of the kind of the expectations, sometimes even with the first phone call before they even come into the office or even have their first visit, really helped to kind of, women are usually generally very understanding, I found.
Yeah, set expectations. Well, you have to look at why are they demanding, or why do they think they want that in the first place? And a lot of times it's because they've had a traumatic experience with a provider before, either in birth or somewhere else, and they feel like the only way they can be seen and heard is if they get one provider. But
absolutely. So you bring up this other really phenomenal point that struck me many years ago, when women were like, I want you, I have to have you, I have to have this person, or any other colleague or any other friend of mine. And what it really came down to was women wanted a specific outcome. So, and sometimes identifying and helping, and now the group that I work, now I work in a group, and I'm doing deliveries as part of a group, and they can get me or they can get any of my partners, and kind of identifying a woman's expected outcomes at the beginning of the pregnancy. Because sometimes women would come to me because I'm a midwife and they're like, well, I want to have a vaginal delivery and I think that you're going to support me in a vaginal delivery. And it's like, aha, okay. So the outcome you want by having me at your birth is you want a vaginal delivery. Okay, let me get you comfortable with why my partners are also going to support you in having a vaginal delivery, or having a low intervention birth, or no intervention birth, or whatever type of birth outcome they were actually looking for. So it's kind of detaching myself. Like, it's not really me they're coming for, they're really coming for a specific outcome. And that just opened up so many doors for my practice. And so many, it helped so much to kind of make it okay for everybody, make it okay for me to have a life and to still do what I love, and made it okay for the patients and for their, for our clients and their experience as well.
yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so back to that was some great sidetracking, but back to the in-network, out of network birth as a business. What is happening to reimbursements? Like, I know this is going to be different everywhere, but could you kind of give us an idea of like what's happened in the last, you said 20 years as you've been watching these trends? What's happening to the money?
Yeah. So, the amount of, so providers are reimbursed for pregnancy in two ways. So they're either reimbursed for the actual delivery itself, which is just, so in medicine, we have these things called CPT codes. And we also have diagnosis codes. So if you've ever gotten an out-of-network bill, or you've ever gotten something called an EOB, an explanation of benefits. So if you have Oxford or United Healthcare, Aetna, they'll often send you something in the mail that says, this is not a bill at the top. And then it'll explain like, okay, on this date, you went in, on February 18th, you went in and you had this service, you had your blood drawn. So it'll say venipuncture, and then it'll have a CPT code next to it. And then it'll say you had a maybe you left a urine sample, you had a urinalysis done, and there'll be another CPT code next to it. And you had a 15-minute visit with your midwife, and there'll be a CPT code next to it. And then there's also diagnosis codes. And that's what you kind of look at when you're looking at your explanation of benefits. And so for birth, there's one CPT code for the actual birth. So vaginal delivery has a CPT code, C-section has a CPT code, VBAC has a CPT code. And then there's another code for what's called global care. So every single visit you have in your whole pregnancy is all lumped into one sum. And it's done on purpose like that, because they don't want physicians and midwives to say, well, Sarah, you have to come in every single Tuesday and they're just going to rack up your bill. We've all heard about, different types of practitioners who have done, we've heard about different, like, chiropractors or dentists. I mean, not to throw anyone under the bus, but, you've heard a story about a friend who went somewhere and it's like, well, you have to come in 3 times a week. And so they made this global fee schedule to kind of protect patients from that. So when the doctor or the midwife tells you to come in, they actually really need you to come in. It's actually really for your health, your safety, your well-being, because the doctor or midwife is getting paid whether you have 8 visits or whether you have 15 visits. So now that's working against women, because if women now sometimes women need to come in more than the 12 visits that they're supposed to standardly have under this global charge. And they have round ligament pain and they want to get it checked out, or they have a urinary tract infection and they want to come and get it checked out. And they're kind of getting pushed away by their provider staff because the provider isn't going to make any more money if they come in more or not, because it's billed under
Yeah.
this global charge.
Interesting. Is it true that OBs make more for a C-section than they do for a vaginal delivery?
So in some states, that's true. And under the Medicaid reimbursement rate, it is reimbursed more. So under like the federal Medicaid reimbursement, they do make more money for C-section.
So do you think that's contributing to more unnecessary C-sections?
I think that the issue with the C-section epidemic is multifactorial. I think that there are so many factors. I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast on like why the C-section epidemic is here. And I think that this is a tiny little sliver of the issue. I don't think that physicians are necessarily thinking about reimbursement, because of all of the physicians that I've worked with, a lot of them don't know that, believe it or not.
Well, we know it as, it goes out in the birth community. Don't let him give you a C-section. He's only doing it so he can make some more money. Like I've heard that cajillions of times.
Yeah, but I think most people who go into birth, even OBs, do it because it's a passion and a calling, and something inside of them wants women to have the birth experience that they want. I do, maybe it's just because they're my colleagues, but I really do believe that about most OBs, that they really are working on the side of the patient.
Well, even if the reimbursement's the same, if they see a labor going super, super long, they'll get paid the same amount, whether they're there for the patient for 36 hours or there and for 12 and decide to do a C-section. So there's also that motivation, right?
Right. So that's definitely 100% true. And there have been a lot of rules and regulations that come down now from JCAHO, the joint, JCAHO stands for the Healthcare Administration.
Got it.
And from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, there's a lot of rules and regulations now about when you can actually perform a C-section. And so many hospitals, because of what happened with Obamacare, the reimbursement was actually changed based on C-section rates and episiotomy rates. And there were different markers. And one of them is something called the NTSVD C-section rate. So the Noliporous, term, singleton, vertex woman, and her C-section rates is something that's incredibly highly regulated now throughout the entire US.
So it's basically when a woman comes in, baby's in perfect position, full term, then they really discourage the C-sections.
Right. And Noliporous. So meaning it's her first baby.
Oh, good. And that's something Obamacare changed, huh?
Right. So Obamacare put that in motion, and that it has carried over, and we still have it to this day. And it's a metric that is incredibly tracked in every single hospital, probably pretty heavily for the last, I would say, maybe since 2016. So most hospitals are working quite fervently to reduce this NTSVD C-section rate.
Okay. Because so why are they working? It's because it's tracked in how they get penalized or how they get paid?
Yes, how they get paid. Their reimbursement rates are affected based on this NTVSD rate.
So if they have too high of a C-section rate, then what about hospitals that are typically higher risk hospitals?
Well, that's you're risking out because it's the Noliporous, time, term, head down, singleton. Yeah. So if you are in an area, I practice in an area where it's, it's a major metropolitan area, and we have a level 3 NICU. And so a lot of people will come to us that have abnormal placentation, abnormal placentas, and they'll have triplets and twins and a lot of complications and high risk issues. And so those births don't actually go into this tally, which is really what is, what it was we're trying to reduce as a group, as a society, that includes physicians and administrators alike.
Got it. Cool. Awesome. Okay. So back to the reimbursement rate. So it used to be X and now it's half of X, or what's it doing?
I mean, every year it goes down. So
why are they doing that?
So we have inflation, and this year we had quite a significant amount of inflation, and every year it's going down. And I think they're doing that because these are publicly traded companies that, have to, satisfy their shareholders basically. And so they have to continue to grow and generate revenue. So how are they going to do that? One of the major ways is that they're going to take money away from the people who are actually distributing care. I mean, they try to get rid of, as they're trying to automate things. They're doing other things too. I don't want to just say that they're just taking all the money from the physicians, but that's a big part of it for sure.
Okay, I want to swing to the other side of the pendulum then. Why aren't more OBs hospitals private and only take cash pay? I mean, there's home birth midwives that pretty much that's what they do. There's some home birth midwives that can take insurance, but it's pretty rare. Why don't more OBs just say, you know what? Done with the system. My client can afford me if they want me, and go off all networks and just do cash pay. What is the actual cost of a delivery?
So that is a phenomenal question, and one that I think has a lot of different answers. I think that a lot of physicians and midwives don't exactly know how to do that. And I think that they're sometimes afraid to make the transition and afraid to make the jump to cash pay, because you can't just like open up shop. You graduate residency and then you open up shop and you're like, okay, cash pay, like come to me and we'll just start doing deliveries. You have to like build a name for yourself, build a reputation, get reviews online, get a following, have raving fans, and then you would make the leap. And so I think, and this is something that we can, get into further if you want to too, is that making the transition from in-network doctor or midwife to out-of-network doctor or midwife to ultimately cash pay is really the transition that I think makes a lot of sense.
We expect them to be altruistic. We don't even think about them running a business. But I always thought, you go to medical school. Well, really, it was chiropractic school, eye doctor, dentist, whatever. You go to all this training and then they like graduate you and like, good luck, have fun running your business. And it's
and they're not given any, in midwifery school, we didn't have one single class about business, bookkeeping, how to run a P&L, how to, a profit and loss statement, what that even was, like what the importance of key performance indicators are, or, how to track really any of the aspects of our business. So it doesn't surprise me that physicians they're learning this on the job as they go. All physicians pretty much are. I mean, unless they had some sort of business experience before medical school, which most don't.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So go ahead and indulge us with the transition from in-network to out of network to cash pay. What would that look like and how would that affect her?
But I want to also touch back on your question about like, what does birth cost? And also about like, why don't physicians or midwives just do cash pay? And I think that my practice area is in and around New York City, and we do have cash paying physicians, and that a lot of celebrities use, and so that does exist. And we do also have, there's different tiers and kind of a different level of service and almost like a concierge type of experience to those cash paying physicians and those cash paying groups in and around our area.
Well, you think about like a plastic surgery, how different their offices look and how they treat their clients. And it is more like a concierge, a high experience, high touch environment. But that's because it's all cash pay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then when you come into, in Manhattan, there's probably a handful of cash pay physicians. I want to say there's maybe 5 or 6. And when you go to their offices, they look like plastic surgeon or cosmetic dentist offices. They look like hotels. They're really luxurious and very comfortable, but that's part of the whole birth experience, is that's part of it too. So then what does birth cost? I mean, it could, you could fly your own private physician to your own private island in the Caribbean too. So, it's like,
yes, what does that cost? Right, exactly. But I mean, well, I don't know. We got a bill. This is kind of off topic a little bit, but we got a bill for our son's 13-day stay in an ICU, and it was $1 bazillion. But then I thought, you know what? I wonder what this cost. So I divided the bill by how many days he was there, and then divided like a room cost. I run a hotel too, so I need room costs, and then how many nurses had to be on duty, how many patients were on the floor, what I expected my doctors to be making. I'm like, I don't want my doctor surgeon to be making anything less than $250 an hour. Like that's not fair. He's working on my son, right? I did all this math, and when it came down to it, it pretty much Like I was like, oh, there's like $4,000 or $5,000 left of this bill that I can't account for. But it made sense that it is expensive to run a thing like that. But me paying it out of pocket would have destroyed us financially. So thank goodness for insurance. But a birth isn't like that. A non-complicated birth, it doesn't require 14 days in the ICU. It doesn't require round the clock medical care. So yeah, what should it cost?
Yeah. So I think that like it, so there's kind of a double standard in terms of hospital. So you bring up like a really, really important good point also, which is what the hospital makes and then what the provider makes. And they're two different things.
Mm,
And, hospitals are still making pretty good money in OB, but providers aren't. And actually there's kind of a belief in the medical community that OB, along with radiology and along with anesthesia, along with the ER and along with oncology, are like one of the areas in the hospital that are actually still making money and not losing money.
mm,
So when patients come in and they go to med surg floors, or they go to like a pulmonary, like a lung floor or a cardiac floor, because reimbursements are so down in those fields also, those parts of the hospital are actually areas where the hospital's losing money. But in OB, the hospital is actually still making money in OB. So I think hospital stays, I mean, there are, believe it or not, there are actually out-of-network hospitals too. So an out-of-network hospital stay can run you like $50,000 a night. And whether or not your insurance will actually pay that, which is a whole nother topic too. I mean, this topic could go on forever and ever, but and then in network, it usually ends up being maybe more around like $20,000 or $25,000 a night. But the hospital will oftentimes do what's called a super bill. So they'll bill the insurance, like it's like this weird game that the insurance will play with doctors and hospitals or care facilities, where if you come to me and let's say you're dehydrated and you come into my office and you need an IV because you have hyperemesis gravidarum, you have this excessive nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, and so you're going to come and get an IV hydration in my office. The actual bag of IV is like $15 and the actual tubing is like $6. And for me to pay a nurse to administer, the nurse makes anywhere between $30 to $60 an hour, depending on your location. And so that whole process should maybe cost, because it's an hour of the nurse's time and then all of the supplies, and you got to make a little bit of money, 20-30% markup is pretty standard in most industries. It should cost maybe $125 or $150. But in order to get the insurance to pay the $150, we do what's called a super bill. So we send the insurance company a bill for $700. And then we go back and forth and we fight with them about how much they're going to pay. And then they end up paying us $80. So that's the thing about bills in medicine, is that they're usually super bills. And maybe you've heard of that too. If you go to an acupuncturist or a chiropractor and they're like, pay, I'm going to give you a super bill and you submit that to your insurance, and then your insurance will pay me X, Y, and Z. So it's kind of this like weird guessing game that we're always.
It feels so unfair and dishonest.
Well, and unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
So in what other industry does it work like that? Like when you go to the grocery store and you want to buy, let's say a non-food item, you want to buy some shampoo, and the shampoo is $9, you pay $9 and that's it. You don't go to the cashier and you're like, well, you said $9, but I really want to pay $2. And then the cashier is like, you want to pay $2? Well, how about $7? It's like, you don't go through the.
No. Well, can you imagine
time wasted?
Can you imagine building a house this way too? You're like, I need a house, and oh my gosh. Yeah, no, bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that back and forth. And then, even past that, even behind that, there's, they don't pay because your name is, Sarah Smith, but because I didn't send the bill in with Sarah B. Smith, and that's the name that's on your insurance card, they're going to deny the claim that I submitted. And then we have to go through this whole process of, so the physicians and the midwives have to employ billers to work on this end. And then the insurance companies having to pay billers to negate the bills that we're sending them. I mean, it's just a lot of unnecessary redundancies and back and forth that's just costing everybody, and including the patients and the physicians and midwives are the ones who are suffering the most. The insurance companies are the ones who are benefiting, unfortunately.
There are no in-betweens. There's the insurance company playing this game, or there's cash pay. I mean, there are people that can afford cash pay, and great, but for most people, they can't afford cash pay. They have to have an insurance involvement, right? So then it's just driving up their premiums, getting them less care. Is there any medium?
So there are a few, very few self-funded plans. So that is something that's starting to catch a little bit more momentum. And I've seen that a lot with churches and religious organizations, where also sometimes like firefighters or any civil service like cops, they will have a self-funded plan. So there'll be a group that will actually, instead of paying money to an insurance company, they'll pay money into a plan, and then they'll withdraw money from the plan for the services that they need. So it's kind of like the group is making their own insurance company. A lot of times though, these self-funded plans are run through one of the major 5 insurance companies like Cigna, Aetna, United, Blue Cross Blue Shield.
So it seems like the fox is in the hen house a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Like totally. But I think that, we've had so many disruptions in so many industries, and you being in film, film is an industry that was totally disrupted. And, look what happened with Blockbuster to Netflix to, GME to AMC.
Bring on the disruption. Okay. And you are a disruptor.
I hope so. So,
well, you are a visionary. So you advise people to get out of network. What does out of network mean?
Yeah, so I definitely, so 2 things. It works for both ways. So it definitely works for, so if you have the choice as a consumer, as a patient, to have an out of network or in network plan, choose your out of network plan. So a lot of times it's not that much more money in a premium monthly. And it will give you the option to access many more physicians, especially in my area, in the New York City area. A lot of times when, my mom's a little bit older, she's getting into her more senior years, and she goes to a lot of doctors and a lot of, nurse practitioners, a lot of healthcare providers, and most of them are out of network. And it's kind of it's starting to become seen in our area more as that's kind of the best of the best, the more prestigious, the physicians and providers who can actually kind of warrant being out of network, like charging a little bit more. It's kind of seen as a good thing. So consumers can have the option to choose, a lot of times choose an out of network plan when they're picking one with their employer or on a healthcare exchange, and not being afraid to exercise their out of network portion, because sometimes it's not as expensive as they think they are. So if you call your insurance company does not want you to go out of network, because an out of network reimbursement for the doctor or the midwife or the provider is much higher for the insurance company. And it's not necessarily that much higher for the patient himself or herself.
So are they asking the patient to make up because I always thought when you went out of network, then you had to kind of make up the difference, but no.
Yeah. So it doesn't always work that way, because it depends on how your plan works. And there's a lot of different, and it's kind of like the way that finance people talk. Sometimes I think they kind of throw all these terms at you and, what this means and that means. And you're just like, I'm just trying to plan for my retirement, and I don't understand all these terms. And do I want an annuity, or do I want a 401k, or do I want a pension? I'm not sure. And I think insurance does the same thing when it comes to, they kind of thrive on keeping patients in the dark. There's an in-network and an out-of-network portion to every plan that has both. So there's an in-network deductible and there's an out-of-network deductible. And then there's an in-network co-insurance and there's an out-of-network co-insurance, meaning that if your insurance will pay 80% or 90% of the provider's bill, and you're left to pay 10%. But a lot of times it's a super bill. So if you go back to my IV example, I'm putting out a $700 bill. I'm hoping to get $150. If insurance is going to pay 80% of my $700 bill, then the patient is left with a zero balance sometimes.
Mm. Okay, I'm gonna let that sink in for a minute. So sometimes it's like those car and collision places that they're like, "What's your deductible?" And you tell them, and they're like, "Okay, so we'll charge you we'll charge your insurance company this, and then you don't actually have to pay your deductible."
It's exactly the same thing.
Okay.
So, and it's done legally. So the way that I just described it, it kind of sounds it could sound like potentially illegal. I don't want to get myself into
No, it
trouble.
doesn't sound like that. It doesn't sound like you didn't make it sound like that. But that's I've seen that in action. I didn't understand what was going on behind the scenes, but I have seen that happen.
So what we do, so I work in an out of network practice now, and we have a cash paying portion also for what we do in birth. And the way that, so what I would really encourage women specifically to do is that not be afraid of out of network providers, and two, to not rely on everything that your insurance says about going out of network, but to talk to the provider themselves. So one of the things that we have in the state of New Jersey is we actually have an act. It's called the Accountability and Portability Protection Act for patients specifically, so that they're not allowed to be charged out of network without their consent. And also they're not allowed to get what's called a surprise bill. And a lot of other states have different names for the same exact thing. And so most likely in your state, probably in Utah, probably in many states, there's some sort of bill that protects patients from surprise bills. And so when you come to your provider's office for the first time, they have to disclose to you what your fees are going to be upfront. And for us, it's pretty easy because we can tell patients you're getting this global charge. So this is now back to the global charge that's actually kind of working to our advantage now and the patient's advantage, because we're going to be like, we know what the global charge is going to be.
Yeah, that's good.
And so we're able to tell you upfront how much a pregnancy and how much a birth is going to be, whether you have a C-section, whether you come every single day for your whole pregnancy, because global charge is global charge.
Mm-hmm.
Or whether you come 3 times in your pregnancy because you're out of town, or you transferred, or you had your care somewhere else.
So I've got a question. I've heard this come up several times in just the community. Like, if you go to the hospital, they're not giving you the care you want. And you're in labor, and they're pushing you to things you can sign out AMA against medical advice. And I've heard people say, well, do it before the birth because they don't get paid a dime unless you actually give birth there. And so you can just pick up and move to another hospital, another provider if you don't like how your birth is going. Is that true?
No, so that's totally not true, because any encounter can be billed for.
Okay.
So when you have FaceTime, even if you just have FaceTime with the nurse, that can be billed for. Okay. And then if you're coming in and then you're saying leave AMA before, you're probably seen by a physician or a midwife, someone who is a billing provider, someone who has an MPI that can actually be billable. And then they're going to bill for whatever encounter they had for you. And what's interesting about obstetrics specifically is that the triage area can be billed as an emergency room. I mean, this is totally separate topic, but so if you come in, let's say you're coming in and you're like, I think my water broke, and maybe it broke, let's say it really broke, but you're going to leave and go deliver somewhere else. So when the midwife checks you and sees, oh yeah, your water broke, that encounter that you had with the midwife can be billed as an emergency room visit, mm-hmm. Even though you didn't give birth there.
It just feels like it's so overwhelming to understand how this works so you're saying now you could get double billed. Could the insurance ever come back to you and say, well, you moved hospitals, so we're not going to pay one, you have to pay one? Like, so many people are just so afraid of getting in arguments with their insurance company that they end up with subpar care.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another benefit to going to an out-of-network provider, because an out-of-network provider will actually have the time and the resources to sit down and talk to you and explain all of those things to you. But to go back to your point about double billing, you're not actually getting double billed because you're having rule out rupture of membranes in one hospital and then you're delivering in another hospital.
Got it. Okay.
So what
All
you
right.
can't do, and this is like a totally another complicated side topic, but if you come in labor and the provider says, okay, your water's broken, your water ruptured, and then you deliver there, they actually then can't bill for that rule out labor rupture experience, that encounter, because it's part of your
the birth.
delivery.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's not really any incentive for them to kind of keep you or push you away, because they're going to get paid either way.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I cannot believe how fast. I never thought it would be so fascinating to talk about insurance, but okay, wait, one last point though. I want to make sure this gets lots of time, time in the sun, but you encourage physicians to go from, if they're in network, to venture out and to do
Absolutely.
out of network.
Yes, definitely.
And then you try to move them to cash pay eventually, or if that works for their practice and their.
Most of the time when a physician goes to, it's very hard to go from out of network to cash pay. So you have to kind of have almost a celebrity status.
Got it.
And so you'll see some of those OBs. There's one in the Kardashians. I think her name is Dr. The Kardashians OB. She's cash pay only. Because she has such a celebrity status and such a celebrity following and a YouTube channel and all these different things. If you want her to deliver you, I don't even know how much it is. I'm assuming it's in the six digit range. But most of the time when a physician goes from in network to out of network, they're going to be very comfortable in the out of network model. They're going to be able to not have to see patients in a factory setting. They're going to be able to slow down. They're going to be able to kind of either hire more physicians, group them up, like I said, into pods, or not take as many patients because they're going to be getting reimbursed so much more that it's going to they're going to be doing they're going to be doing so much less work, but making the same amount of money. And I have a whole thing on my website about how to do that. And obviously I do consulting for how to take a physician from in network to out of network. And it's much, much, much easier than most physicians think. And I really want to encourage OBs to do that, because especially OBs that have their own private practice that aren't part of the hospital practice, or aren't already part of what's called a collective bargaining group. And some physicians will do this. Well, they'll pair up with other physicians and they'll go into a collective bargaining agreement with different insurers. And I think that's just the worst thing for physicians to do. I think that just takes their control away from their practice, takes control away from what they can actually do in with their own business. And physicians and midwives both should really go out of network. So I'm happy to talk to anyone and give any advice.
Yeah,
and
that leads me right into my next thing. Tell us where they can tell us your website and all of the different ways people can get in a hold of you.
Yeah, so my website is just my name, KristinMallon.com, and it's Kristin with 2 I's. And all of my socials on there, all of the ways to contact me is on the website. It's really the best place to go. And I'm happy to kind of continue the conversation further.
Yeah, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for kind of opening the curtain on all of this. I mean, you're right. We could do a series of 10 podcasts just diving into this. And
yeah, absolutely. And, there's so much to say.
And I hope that, as a visionary and as a mover and shaker, that what we've talked about today, our daughters will listen and be like, wow, Mom, what was the system like back then? That's so archaic.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. So don't be afraid of going out of network if you're a patient or a provider.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please visit us at birthcircle.com, join our Facebook groups, or find us on Instagram and Pinterest. We hope you'll use our resources to support your birthing experience.